questions to address concerning fiscal years 2015's budget request, specifically the impact of the proposed $3.2 billion reduction from fiscal year 2014 enacted levels, the impact of sequestration, and how force structure changes will affect the military construction budget in 15 and beyond. But before I introduce our witnesses, I would like to turn to my good friend, our ranking member, Mr. Bishop, from the great state of Georgia, to make any opening remarks he'd like to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad that today we're going to have the opportunity to talk about the President's 15 budget request, and we have the civilian leadership that can explain the priorities for military construction in each of the services. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today on how the current budget climate is affecting their military construction projects, not only this year, but in requests for the next few years. Mr. Chairman, as I look at these requests, I have to say that I haven't seen requests this low in a long, long time. And on another subject, equally important, is the request for a new BRAC round. In 2005, Congress authorized a 2005 a BRAC that ended up being far more expensive and expansive than we were led to believe. I can understand in 2004 that it was known that that was a 24% excess in capacity, but during the 05 BRAC round, defense only made reductions of 3.4%. I realize that it was, as many of you have stated in our private meetings, more of a reshaping type, a restructuring type BRAC, but a lot of money was spent to move things around, and most importantly, moving people around. So I have some concerns regarding another BRAC round, and I realize that these are very difficult issues for all the members of Congress, and so I'm glad for today's hearing so we can discuss them openly, and I look forward to a very rigorous discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back, and thank you for the opportunity to share my concerns.
Thank you, Sanford. We'll move right into the introduction of our witnesses, and we're delighted to have with us the Honorable John Conger, who's Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Installations and Environment, Katherine Hammack, Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installations, Energy and Environment, the Honorable Dennis McGinn, Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy Installations and Environment, and delighted to also have with us Kathleen Ferguson, who's the Acting Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, performing duties as Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Installations, Environment, and Logistics. We deeply appreciate your service to the country and for taking the time to be here. And if I could, without objection, would like to enter your statements in their entirety into the record and ask you, if you could, to summarize your remarks to the committee. And we look forward to your testimony, and I'm delighted to begin with you, Mr. Conger. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Culberson, Ranking Member Bishop, distinguished members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you to discuss the Department's fiscal year 2015 budget request for installations and environment. I'd like to touch on 3 items from my opening statement. 1, the top-level budget numbers, 2, BRAC, and 3, European infrastructure consolidation. I'll be brief because I want to get to your questions. The testimony that I've submitted for the record describes the $6.6 billion that we're requesting for military construction, the $8 billion we're requesting for sustaining and restoring our facilities, and the $3.5 billion we're seeking for environmental compliance and cleanup. It is worth noting that the Opportunity Growth and Security Initiative, which represents funding above the budget caps, includes $26 billion for DOD, $2.9 billion of which is for MILCON and $4.2 billion of which is for facility sustainment and restoration. But because infrastructure generally has a long useful life and its associated degradation is not as immediate, the DOD components are taking more risk in the military construction program in order to decrease risk in other operational and training budgets. In addition, reducing military construction reduces investment risk as we contemplate the uncertain allocation of force structure cuts and the possibility of a new round of BRAC. The MILCON request alone, as was alluded to earlier, is a 40% reduction from what we requested last year. The budget challenges facing the Department are deep, and they extend for many years. We continue to believe that an important way to ease this pressure is with base closure, allowing us to avoid paying upkeep for unneeded infrastructure and making those funds available for readiness and modernization of our forces. I'd like to quote Speaker Boehner. He was speaking the other day to the Dayton Daily News, where he said, and I quote, "There should be another round of BRAC. We have bases that are unnecessary. They need to go." I appreciate the Speaker's support for our request for a new BRAC round. But that said, I know that the high cost of 2005 has left a bad taste in many members' mouths. We have long talked about the emphasis in 2005 on transformation rather than efficiency. But that answer didn't satisfy Congress's concern about the $35 billion cost. And it certainly didn't explain why we weren't going to end up with more of the same if another round were authorized. The key reason that BRAC 2005 cost so much was that we were willing to accept recommendations that did not save money. They did not pay back. So, in that context, I asked my staff to review each of the recommendations from BRAC 2005. And what we found was that, that we actually ended up conducting 2 parallel BRAC rounds. The first one was about transformation. The recommendations were expensive, and they didn't have payback. But there are some actions you can only execute when you have BRAC authority. Looking at the nearly half of last round's recommendations that either didn't pay back at all or paid back in more than 7 years, we found that this quote-unquote transformation BRAC cost $29 billion out of the $35 billion and only resulted in $1 billion in annual savings. The other half of the recommendations, however, was focused on saving money, focused on efficiency. These recommendations had payback in less than 7 years. They ended up costing a total of $6 billion and yielding recurring savings of $3 billion a year. This quote-unquote efficiency BRAC proves that when we're trying to save money, we do. That's the kind of round we're seeking to conduct now. One last topic I'm going to touch on is the European infrastructure consolidation effort. Many members have said that we should close bases overseas before we do BRAC. So we've embarked on a BRAC-like process in Europe. However, in this effort, we're not looking at bringing forces back to the United States. We hold forces constant, and we're looking for efficiencies. So it will not take pressure away from the need for a new BRAC round. The analysis has taken longer than expected, and we're nearing completion. We anticipate results this spring. We have affirmed several recommendations already and have offered classified briefings to committee staff and members. In fact, we're scheduled to brief this subcommittee staff tomorrow. While most of the recommendations will take years to execute and will require a lengthy consultation, there are some near-term activities, and there's one that I want to highlight and ask for your support on. That's the consolidation of intelligence activities at RAF Croton. There's a $92 million construction request in this budget, part of a 3-year effort that we expect to cost on the order of $300 million, that will yield $1 billion in savings over the next 10 years. That's the kind of thing we're trying to accomplish. Thanks again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Chairman Culberson and Ranking Member Bishop, other members of the committee. I'm glad to be here today to talk on behalf of soldiers, families, and civilians in the United States Army. And I thank you for the opportunity to discuss the fiscal year 2015 military construction budget proposal. For fiscal year 2015, the Army is asking for $1.3 billion in military construction, Army family housing, and the Army share of the DoD base closure account. This represents a 39% reduction from fiscal year 2014. In addition to military construction, the Army is asking for $13 billion for installation energy, environmental programs, facility sustainment, restoration, and modernization, and base operations support. Due to the fiscal reduction required by current law and the end of combat operations in Afghanistan, the Army is shrinking our active component end strength to 490,000 by the end of fiscal year 2015. The 2014 Quadrennial Defense Review calls for the Army end strength to decline further to between 440,000 and 450,000. As end strength force structure declines, we must assess the rights and right-size supporting infrastructure to ensure that training and readiness needs are met. This requires us to achieve a difficult balance between the cost of maintaining infrastructure and force readiness. Last year, the committee asked when a capacity analysis was last conducted. So we are conducting a facility capacity analysis to determine the magnitude of excess capacity in the United States from announced reductions. The analysis shows to date that inside the U.S., excess Army capacity ranges between 12 and 28%, depending upon the facility category group, with an average of 18% excess capacity in the Army. Additional end strength reductions below 490,000 will increase excess capacity. In Europe, as part of the European Infrastructure Consolidation Review that Mr. Conger referenced, we are addressing excess capacity. With a target completion date in spring of 2014, the current analysis of Army facilities in Europe reflects a 10 to 15% excess capacity in Europe. We are on track to shrink overseas supporting infrastructure, overhead, and operating budgets. BRAC is a proven means to address excess capacity in the United States. Prior BRAC rounds are producing $2 billion in cumulative net savings to the Army every year. The Government Accounting Office audited BRAC 2005 and found that it's saving DoD as a whole a net $3.8 billion a year. BRAC savings from DoD for all prior rounds cumulatively amount to $12 billion a year. As John stated, we have achieved the expected savings in the 2005 round of BRAC and have a clear business case for a 2014 round. There is a clear path forward for Congress to agree to a new round of BRAC. As Mr. Conger stated, the BRAC 2005 round was comprised of two parallel BRAC rounds, a transformation BRAC and an efficiency BRAC. The efficiency BRAC round was a component that produced savings. The next round of BRAC will only be an efficiency BRAC and will likewise produce savings, real savings for the Army. The Army and Congress have historically concluded that using BRAC authorities is more transparent and economically advantageous to local communities than other non-BRAC authorities in addressing excess capacity. We fully support the Administration's request to authorize a single round of BRAC in 2017 and look forward to working with Congress to determine the criteria for a successful BRAC round. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I look forward to your questions on our recommended 2015 budget.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please recognize Secretary McGinn. Thank you for your service to the country and for being here today, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bishop, members of the subcommittee, I am pleased to appear before you today to provide an overview of the Department of the Navy's investment in its shore infrastructure. But before I begin, I'd just like to thank the committee for the absolutely wonderful, fast work on reprogramming funds to get our Naval Air Systems Command team back into their headquarters at the Washington Navy Yard. As a result of your rapid action, construction contract was led in January, and we anticipate having that fine team back in place in April of next year. From our nation's infancy, the United States Navy and Marine Corps team has operated far from our shores to protect vital security and economic interests. Forward presence is no less important today than it was in 1902 when Congress authorized President Thomas Jefferson to, quote, employ such of the armed vessels of the United States as may be judged requisite for protecting effectually the commerce and seamen thereof on the Atlantic Ocean, the Mediterranean, and adjoining seas, unquote. While the nature of today's threats has grown and is more lethal and insidious than 200 years ago, we need to compensate for that. Our Navy and Marine Corps team must be manned, trained, and equipped to deter and respond to belligerent actors wherever, whenever, and however they strike. Yet the fiscal imperative to reduce our nation's debt and control the deficit introduces additional complexity and challenges as our department strives to strike the right balance between resources, risks, and our strategy. Our President's budget request for fiscal year 2015, while supporting the 2014 Quadrennial Defense Review, comes at a price to the shore establishment. Fortunately, Investments made in prior years will enable the Department of the Navy to achieve forward presence without undermining the shore establishment in the near term. I look forward to working with you to sustain the warfighting readiness and quality of life for the most formidable expeditionary fighting force in the world. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Secretary McGinn. I'm always pleased to have Thomas Jefferson's wisdom a part of the record here in Congress. Thank you, sir. Secretary Ferguson, we're delighted to have you, and thank you for your service, and look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Culberson, Ranking Member Bishop, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the Air Force's military construction and military family housing FY15 budget request. On behalf of Secretary James and General Welsh, I'd like to thank this subcommittee for its unwavering support of the Air Force. I know members are eager to ask questions of this panel, so I will keep my comments brief. To that end, details regarding our FY15 budget request are included in my written statement. I would like, however, to highlight two topics of interest: the challenges the Air Force faces in the current fiscal environment and base realignment and closure. The current fiscal environment required the Air Force to make some very tough choices. In order to best support national defense requirements and comply with the Defense Department's fiscal guidance and challenges, the Air Force chose capability over capacity. Moving forward, the Air Force seeks to maintain a force ready to meet the full range of military operations while building an Air Force capable of executing its core missions. The budgetary cuts generated by sequestration are difficult to absorb. In fiscal year 2013, the Air Force stood down 31 active flying squadrons for more than 3 months, initiated civilian furloughs, cut maintenance in facilities, and delayed major maintenance actions to include depot aircraft overhauls. The Air Force believes if funded at the FY15 PB top-line level, it can continue a gradual path of recovery to full-spectrum combat readiness and support its military construction and housing programs. My second topic, as has been a number of my other counterparts here, relates to base realignment and closure. The bottom line is we need another round of BRAC and fully support the Department's request for a future BRAC round. While we have no excess infrastructure capacity analysis, no current excess infrastructure capacity analysis from which to draw, the Department's capacity analysis from 2004 estimated the Air Force had 24% excess infrastructure capacity. BRAC 2005 directed the Air Force to close only 8 minor installations and directed 63 realignments affecting 122 installations. Since then, the Air Force has reduced our force structure by more than 500 aircraft and reduced our active duty military end strength by nearly 8%. Additionally, the Air Force has outlined plans in its FY15 PB submission to reduce force structure and personnel even further. Even though we have not done an updated capacity analysis, we intuitively know we still have excess capacity. One way we have, however, reduced our footprint is through demolition of aging facilities and infrastructure. Since 2006, we've demoed almost 50 million square feet of aging facilities that were excess to our needs, and we estimate the resultant savings at greater than $300 million. Despite our best efforts and innovative programs, the Air Force continues to spend money maintaining excess infrastructure that would be better spent recapitalizing and sustaining our weapon systems, training to improve readiness, and investing in the quality of life needs of our airmen and their families. Divestiture of excess property on a grander scale is a must. In conclusion, the Air Force made hard choices during budget formulation. We attempted to strike the delicate balance of a ready force today and a modern force tomorrow while adjusting to budgetary reductions. To help achieve that balance, the Air Force elected to accept risk in installation support, military construction, and facility sustainment. We believe this risk is prudent and manageable in the short term, but we must continue the dialogue on right-sizing our installations footprint for a smaller, more capable force that sets the proper course for addressing our most pressing national security requirements. Members of the subcommittee, thank you for your strong support of the men and women of the United States Air Force, active Guard, Reserve, and civilians. This concludes my opening remarks, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I appreciate it. Mr. McGinn, are you aware of, does the Navy have any analysis, current numbers that you can rely on in terms of what your excess capacity may be?
We have not done an excess capacity analysis in a number of years, but we, too, also support having a BRAC. We find that that process is very, very analytical. It relies on fact-based decisions and priorities, and we would welcome the opportunity to
Sure.
conduct one.
I also think it's important to note for the record that the United States Marine Corps was the first and the Navy's next in being able to adopt generally accepted accounting procedures. And I believe the Marine Corps, as of today, can be audited by an outside accounting firm, and the Navy's next, right?
We're working very hard on that. Yes,
Okay,
sir.
great. I hope the Army and the Air Force can be right there behind them so you can actually do careful, honest analysis. But in light of the fact, the Army has got numbers, you said, Madam Secretary, that indicate about an 18% average excess capacity currently. So in the absence of, current numbers from the Air Force or the Navy, I share Mr. Bishop's deep concern and, frankly, astonishment that you've asked for a 33% reduction in your construction budget below what we enacted last year. And you know how strongly this committee supports what you do, and we want to make sure that the men and women in uniform have everything they need in terms of creature comforts, and don't ever have to worry about ever have to look over their shoulder or worry one bit about their health care or their housing or their families. And so that's a real, frankly, shocking number, and I don't personally expect that that's one that we're likely to go with. But I would like to hear your explanation, if you could. Talk to us about how the department determined what projects or accounts would be reduced. Where'd you come up with 33.1% or $3.2 billion reduction? And if, just say the committee were to approve that, what areas would you see most at risk? Mr. Conger?
So, in order to answer your question, there are multiple things that go into that. It wasn't a holistic, here's what your MILCON number is. Each of the services built their own budget, and they'll be able to speak to how they set their own priorities. But I think holistically, one can point to the fact that as we are looking at a constrained top line, the priority has to be readiness. And so we had an allocation of resources that attempted to ensure that readiness accounts were more fully funded, and that meant that we had to decide where to take risk as a department.
OMB gave you X amount of money, and you just had to work to try to make it fit within that, or how did
The
you?
Bipartisan Budget Act that was passed a few months ago set budget numbers for 14 and 15. The number that we sent over adheres to that number.
Right, the overall, that's the overall number. I mean, but from your perspective, your piece on the military construction portion,
So the
that was
overall
not, that's
piece
not in
on
that
the-
overall budget plan. That's just the one big number.
Right, and so the department has to try and come up with a plan that meets that number.
Well, right, for your piece of it. But I mean, you basically, OMB comes in and says, here's how much money we believe you need to get out of this entire.
As a department.
Yeah.
It doesn't bifurcate the MILCON from that.
No, I understand, but I mean, the president and the White House obviously have other priorities.
So the direction was to build a budget based on the Bipartisan Budget Act.
That's a top line number.
Yes. And so the department had that number to work with. That said, we had priorities to weigh in meeting that budget.
Yeah.
And facilities were one of those areas where the department decided to take risk.
But in the absence of excess capacity numbers from either the Navy or the Air Force, you don't even know, I mean, tell me, how did you determine what projects or accounts are going to be reduced if you don't even know what the excess capacity is, for example?
It's more a matter, it's less a matter of what's going to be reduced and more a matter of what you're going to decide to fund within the priorities that you've got available funds for.
And what areas do you see most at risk with the numbers that you've given us, a 33% reduction in military construction accounts when, the committee's been very generous and
Right.
supportive in the past, and I know that the committee has scrubbed. We've got superb staff. We're abundantly blessed to have the
Indeed.
majority of minority staff work together beautifully, and I think you flushed out every little extra dollar you can out of these accounts. Where'd you come up with these? Where's 33% come from, and what areas most at risk if we were to just simply adopt what you've given us?
So I think that the risk that we are accepting, because and there's no mistaking that we're accepting risk in facilities. I think that the first place you have to look is the facilities sustainment, restoration, and modernization accounts, which I know aren't part of this committee's appropriation, but are part of the equation as we consider what affects our facilities. It is cheaper to sustain a building than it is to repair it. It's cheaper to repair it than it is to replace it. And so we have accepted risk. We have a facility model to try and say how much money is required to sustain our buildings. And we have, as a department, in each of the services accepted varying degrees of risk as to what we're going to do as far as preventative maintenance, et cetera. That, I think, is probably the highest risk, because that leads to repair requirements, and those repair requirements lead to requirements for new facilities.
Secretary Hammack, could you tell the committee what you told me in our visit, that you had essentially you've been able to function, the level of funding you've got today enables you to handle about 80% of your maintenance and repair needs, I believe, is what you told me, and that if we were to adopt this, you'd be at a level of about 60%?
Yes, sir.
So essentially, you're basically just treading water and just patching the potholes and the leaks in the roof.
The focus is on life, health, and safety in our sustainment accounts. In our MILCON accounts, we're focused on fixing the failing, moving out of temporary structures that we've been in too long, and they're also at a failing level, and restationing what is coming back from Afghanistan, some of our UAVs. And so each of the components, the Guard, Reserve, and the active duty Army, prioritized on the basis of what were the most failing infrastructure requirements.
Well, you've got about, in the 2015 budget request, 79 projects were in the, I noticed in the fiscal year 14 FIDEP for 15, but the budget request also includes 37 new projects that were not in the 14 FIDEP and 12 that were not, that were programmed in the out years beyond 15. Can you talk to us about the rationale behind those changes and those requests from, where did the new ones come from, and how come others dropped out?
Absolutely. Some of the changes came
For
from...
each one of y'all, since you know, excuse me, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, sir. The ads that came into our military program, a lot of those came from emerging requirements that were considered to be failing, and were failing at a more rapid rate than was expected. So those were ads that came in. Some were accelerations from the commands as they re-looked at the restationing. As the Army downsizes to 490,000, we took a very hard look at our MILCON program and determined what was the most critical. As we are considering shrinking even further to 440 or 450, some projects dropped out until we know exactly where they're going to be, so we can avoid building infrastructure that might not be needed by a smaller force.
So if we were to adopt this level of funding, you'd be in a position essentially just patching the potholes and fixing the roof.
Yes, sir.
And that's it.
Yes, sir.
Not likely. We love you and we're going to help. I bet we find a way to help you beyond that. Quickly, if we could, I want to move to my good friend, Mr. Bishop.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Our story is similar. We're not putting at risk any safety, health, or comfort issues for our wonderful men and women in uniform or their families. I would characterize it simply as saying, as a result of the levels of funding we've had in past years and the support from this subcommittee, we have been able to make a lot of progress. This year, projecting ahead to 15, we are not going to be going ahead as far and as fast as we have been over the past several years, but we're not going to be falling behind next year.
You'd be in the same position as the Army, just essentially repairing potholes and fixing the roof?
A little bit better than that. Some new construction, some family houses, but just not achieving the standards that we want to achieve as quickly as we would like to.
Okay. And my good friend Mr. Bishop has been very indulgent on me. I don't mean to take so much time to Ms. Ferguson, then I want to pass to my good friend.
I'll try to be brief here. I just want to hit just a couple of things. As the Air Force built the budget, we looked to build the most capable Air Force ready for a high-end threat that was affordable in 2023. And as we built the budget, we had difficult choices as we attempted to strike that delicate balance between a ready force today and a modern force tomorrow, while also recovering from sequestration. Really what we did was two things. We continue to seek efficiencies and cut overhead. We reduced management headquarters, consolidated activities to achieve 20% savings. We supported the military compensation recommendations, and to prevent deeper cuts to readiness and personnel, we did take risk in military construction, facility sustainment, and installation support. We further also took capacity down, and I think you're all aware we had to look at divesting the A-10 and the U-2 fleet to achieve savings to balance that budget. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me go to Secretary Conger. The request for the round of BRAC in your 15 budget, is it budget driven, or is it drawdown driven, or is it a combination of the two?
It's a combination. The reason you have a BRAC round, though, is because you want to save money, and you're looking for places to save it. You use BRAC as a way to save money when you believe you have excess capacity, and we do.
So it's basically budget driven then?
Well, you don't have a BRAC in general if you don't expect the need to save money. I mean,
So all of this reduction in capacity and reduction in force is budget driven as opposed to strategic defense driven?
I think that it's important to clarify that the main motivation for a BRAC is to save money. The things you can do in BRAC are not always, as we saw in 2005, not always about just saving money. There were transformational activities that we did in 2005. Right now, the department is motivated to fit within the budget constraints that it has, and the reason that we want to BRAC so desperately today is that we don't want to be wasting money on unneeded facilities that therefore means that we have less money to spend on readiness and the warfighter.
But basically, our military is our strategic defense for domestic and foreign protection, and we don't know what the exigencies are going to be. So it's kind of difficult to plan without being strategically prepared and making the assumption, I guess all of this is making the assumption that because we don't have the resources that we've had budget-wise, that our strategic needs are not going to be as great as they have been. Would you say that's correct?
Far be it from me to leap to a general statement like that. I think from a facilities perspective, I can talk about the excess that we have and the optimization, but I'm not the appropriate person to be answering questions about the overall strategic posture of the department.
The excess is a function of what our future requirements are, or is the excess a result of our having unneeded capacity for what we are now doing?
Yes, and when you have a BRAC round, the first thing you do is go to the Joint Staff and say, what's your 20-year force structure plan? What are you projecting for a force structure so that we can use that as an input? It's also, by the way, what we did on the European infrastructure consolidation effort. We went to the Joint Staff first and said, what is the requirement? It is not our job to decide whether we need fewer or more people in the armed forces.
Thank you. For Ms. Hammack, I just want to ask you if the Army's PEA had an effect on the FY15 program for the Army.
Yes, the PEA that we did last year had an effect on our program. We had done a very close scrutiny of our FY14 MILCON program to try and avoid building things that we thought could have been affected. Right now, we've just started another round of PEA or NEPA in order to look at what kind of infrastructure we would need if we shrunk to 440 or even lower to 420. So we are taking a look at our infrastructure again. As you clearly stated in your opening statement, the last round of BRAC identified an excess capacity of over 20%, yet only reduced by about 3.5%. So there is clearly excess capacity that has been there a while that we have not addressed. The Army's recent study has confirmed that we have excess capacity currently in the Army, that we could do further consolidations, we could do further closures because we have excess capacity. And we could consolidate into our most efficient structures, we could consolidate to increase our efficiency of our operations, and we could save money for the American taxpayer.
And so we should be reassured then that unlike in 2005, that we won't end up with a net savings of very little.
Absolutely, sir. We are not asking for a transformational BRAC. We are asking for an efficiency BRAC. In 2005, we asked for, as Mr. Conger described, 2 parallel BRACs. One was a transformational, one was an efficiency. The efficiency portion looked like prior rounds of BRAC. That is what we are asking for this time.
Okay. Secretary Conger, changing gears for a moment, can you give us an update on the Department's efforts to rebalance the Asia-Pacific region in terms of facilities, specifically in Guam and Japan? I know that the landfill permit from the FRF was signed this past December. So what I'd like to know is, are we finally going to see some real movement on that project?
So 2 things real quick. One quick clarification on the BRAC savings. The 2005 round is saving $4 billion in recurring savings. So that's not nothing. I just wanted to clarify for the record. The second thing is, as far as the shift to Guam, there currently is ongoing an SEIS process, a supplemental environmental impact statement process. The Navy is projected to release the draft, and maybe I should turn to Secretary McGinn to answer the details of this, but we expect that to be coming out early next year. Denny, did you want to?
It should be coming out in about a month or so, Mr. Bishop.
That is the plan?
The supplemental, yes, and it will the draft, it will provide what our preferred alternatives are for the laydown of our U.S. Marines at Guam going forward.
Right, because last year I asked your predecessor if there was a plan showing what was needed on the construction side for the new South Pacific strategy, and there was not one then. So you're saying that there is not one now, but you're working on it.
We do have a plan that is being reviewed within the department that will be published in about 30 days or so. And we'll go through that whole process of taking in inputs on that and then finally deciding on what the exact laydown is. But I will tell you the plan has come into much sharper focus, and I think you'll be able to see that when this supplemental EIS is published.
So can you tell us then what types of projects we can look to see in the Pacific and how lower budgets will affect investments in that area?
Our focus on Guam is to be able to accommodate 5,000 Marines and about 1,700 or so family members. We want to make sure that the living environment, quality of life is adequate, and it will be. We want to make sure that the ability to train those Marines, including live fire training, is evident there. So part of the plan involves live fire training ranges and mobility training ranges. It makes sure that we want to make sure that that strategic location, operated so far forward in areas of critical interest to the United States, has the right kind of infrastructure and base laydown that will support those Marines and enable them to go forward.
Is Japan in agreement with that?
Yes, sir, they are.
They've signed off?
Made a lot of progress with them, and they have signed off.
California, Mr. Valadeo.
Thank you, Mr.
Everybody in the order in which they came in, and I'm a little loose on the 5-minute rule, so I expect everybody to use common courtesy and good sense and how much time to take.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As many of you are aware, this year the state of California is experiencing a significant drought that is causing the fallowing of thousands of acres of productive farmland. Although it is easy to understand the impacts drought can have on agriculture, the drought is also having an impact on our national defense. Last week I had the opportunity to sit down with the commanding officer of the Naval Air Station in Lemoore, who explained to me that the drought is actually increasing the risk of bird strikes at the base. In short, the Navy works with farmers around the base to ensure the land is cultivated in such a way as to prevent birds from entering areas where flight operations take place. Unfortunately, due to the lack of available water as a result of the drought, farmers are unable to cultivate the land, increasing the risks of bird strikes. Last year, because of water shortages, 34% of the fields around NAS Lemoore were fallowed, and the base experienced 43 bird strikes. This year it experienced that many more acres. This year it is expected that many more acres will be followed due to the lack of water, and as a result, more strikes are expected. The drought is not only a threat to our country's agriculture supply, but also an issue of national security due to the danger it poses to our fighter pilots and warfighting aircraft. Assistant Secretary McGinn, apologize. I understand part of your job is ensuring the safety of military and civilian personnel at the Navy's various installations. As a former aviator, will you elaborate on the risks of bird strikes both to aircraft and to personnel? Is the increasing risk of bird strikes at a major air base a serious concern of the Navy?
Yes, sir, it is. Some of the best days of my time in uniform were spent flying out of Naval Air Station Lemoore, F-18s and A-7s, and I will say for the record, bird strikes are bad. And we see an increased threat for the reasons that you outlined when fields lie fallow, ground rodents proliferate, raptors come in to get that ready supply of food, and they produce a lot more danger of airplane-bird collisions. The base is doing a wonderful job at trying to mitigate that, given the tremendous constraints on water. On a normal year back around 2009, the water allocation was about 40,000 acre-feet. For the past several years, they've been able to get by with different types of crop rotation around 24,000 acre-feet. But as you know, with the tight conditions on drought, it's looking even less than that going forward in the future. But this is a definite concern related to aviation safety in Naval Air Station Lemoore. I spoke to the commanding officer this morning, in fact, about this, and he assured me that they're trying to do everything they can, but more water would certainly help.
Will you please elaborate on the costs incurred by the Navy to mitigate against bird strikes because of the drought? Aside from the bird strike related costs, what other costs is the Navy incurring as a result of the California drought?
We are trying to be and are exceeding at being good citizens in the state of California, throughout the state of California, wherever there are Navy and Marine Corps installations. We've cut our water consumption just in the past 3 years by up to 4 billion gallons, and we are going to continue to drive that down even further. In terms of costs, obviously there's the risk of bird strikes that we just talked about, but we are modifying flight patterns and having to, if there is a bird strike, having to repair those aircraft. But the biggest thing is the risk of catastrophic collision at some point in the future if we can't continue to do something about this.
Thank you. And I'd also like to hear from other DOD and from other services represented here on how the California drought is impacting their operations and other additional costs that the services are incurring as a result of dealing with the current drought conditions. And I met with Ms. Hammack last week over this, so feel free if you have anything to add.
What I'd like to add to the conversation is with increased drought, there's increased risk of forest fire, and that has been one of the biggest challenges to the Army. We're watching that very closely. Over the last 6 years, we've had a 27% reduction in our overall consumption of water. We have a net zero initiative to reduce water consumption further, and it is a concern as we're watching water consumption. We're also watching forest fire danger.
The Air Force has 6 installations in California, and they have been partnering with the local governments to comply the maximum extent possible with the drought restrictions and also follow the executive orders and public law. We can get back to you if there's any operational issues. I'm unaware of those right now, but similar to the Army, we've had installations that have reduced water consumption by as much as 40% since 2007 through a number of initiatives.
Nothing.
I think they've said it all. The services have done a really nice job of water conservation, not just in California, but throughout the country. We have legislated goals set out for reducing our potable water consumption, and the department as a whole has blown through those goals and has done an exemplary job of water reduction.
Thank you. That's all I've got, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I recognize my good friend from California, Mr. Farr, who has the dubious distinction, I understand, to have had more BRAC than any other member of the United States Congress.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got on this committee because I'm the most BRAC member of Congress, and I never know that 20 years later I'd still be here talking about BRAC. I think that BRAC is all about promises made, promises kept, and promises to the United States Congress that we'll go through this BRAC process and we have a role, an accomplishment, and a goal for each one of these decisions to reduce or eliminate a base. And I just was looking at Fort Ord, which is the reason it got me to Congress, and what you stated in California in 1991 was to relocate the 1st Brigade, 7th Infantry Division, Light, from Fort Ord, California to Fort Lewis, Washington. That was the reason you sold it. What happened to the 7th Infantry? Norm Dix was on this committee, so excited about it was leaving, and then Congressman Leon Panetta was so sad about it, them losing it. And as I understand, in the process, both lost, that Fort Lewis never got the 7th Division, that you deactivated it. And that's the point, is that was what was sold to Congress, and it just never turned out that way. And I've been left with the, as you were talking about, the unloading of these bases, whether, a decision that they're excess or they need to be realigned. But I think what this committee deals with is that other side, is the uploading, is the community that accepts the responsibility for it. And just like we're seeing in Afghanistan and Iraq, when we pull out, there's a responsibility to build the capacity of those that are left behind. And the way we build that capacity is in cleanup, so that they can use the land. Without cleaned up land, it's what we call mothball, just sits there. Nobody can use it. In fact, we just build fences around it if it has unexploded ordinances. It becomes of no benefit to anybody. It's actually an economic liability to the community. And so I'm kind of shocked, if not feel betrayed by this budget in what you bring to us in your ability to clean up. And it's just not me and my instances with the experience of BRAC in my district, but also the chairman's got bases in Texas with Brooks Air Force Base, the Port Authority of San Antonio, the Lone Star Army Ammunition Plant, in Texarkana, the Ingleside Naval Station. And the ranking member, Mr. Bishop, has the McPherson Army Base, the Forest Park in Fort Gillem, the Navy Air Station in Atlanta, and the Navy Supply Corps School in Athens. All of those have been BRAC'd and are still needing assistance. So my questions really go to your budget, and feeling that, and I've got a lot of specific questions. I want to ask Mrs. Hammack first, because first of all, I want to before I get into the other questions, I want to just thank you, because you did make some promises to this committee last year that you'd take care of this small little acre property that's become a bureaucratic nightmare to try to transfer the Tidball store to transferring it to Monterey County at Fort Hunter Liggett. And I understand that the final touches are in place, and that ought to happen this spring, and I want to thank you for your personal involvement in that. Second, I want to thank you for bringing the water to the Veterans Cemetery that the state's going to build at former Fort Ord. But I want to really get into the cleanup at Fort Ord. We divided that into two categories. Essentially, the land that the civilians were going to use for redevelopment went through an ESCA, environmental service contract with the Fort Ord Reuse Authority. And that's, I think it's gotten short shift from the Pentagon in the success it's had. It's actually ahead of schedule and I think under budget so far. Great news. But the other half of that is the land that's going to stay in federal jurisdiction, which the Army transferred to the Bureau of Land Management, and recently has been declared a national monument. But there's a lot of that land, about 7,000 acres, that still have to be cleaned up. And I don't know how you're going to get there from here to there to get it cleaned up with the budget you have. You're only budgeting $1.3 million for the cleanup of Fort Ord. That's a 92% reduction. So how do you think we can do the mission that's required out there in the timelines promised with such little resources? How are we going to get it cleaned up?
Well, it's good to see you again, and we are working hard at Fort Ord. The priority was placed on transferring those lands that had use to the community first. What is interesting is that in prior BRAC rounds, the environmental burden of closure was high. And that is because there was not a lot of focus on cleaning up the lands while they were being stewarded by the military services. There is now an effort to both clean up our active bases as well as those that have been closed. So what we found in the 2005 BRAC round is that the environmental remediation costs were much, much lower than those of the prior BRAC rounds. And so what we are doing right now is we are focusing on those BLM lands. One of the challenges is something that Representative Valadeo brought up, is the issue in regards to clearing the land so that we can clean them up.
It's no different from the ESCA cleanup than it is for the BLM. They're right next to each other.
They are, except that we left the training ranges, which had the heaviest amount of burden of cleanup, to the last, and those are what takes the longest to clean up because we have to clear the brush first prior to the cleanup, and there are limitations put on us by the state and that region as to the amount of controlled burns that we can do in order to clean up the lands.
But even when you have a controlled burn that gets out of control, burns a lot more than you intended, then you have an opportunity to clean up, and then you wouldn't use that opportunity. You just had to wait for the brush to come back, go through the process, burn it all over. Just a total dumb way of handling a problem. Anyway, I just, there's an insight in here for the BLM lands then to get cleaned up, and there's enough money in the budget to do that?
That is something that we're looking at to see what we can accelerate at Fort Ord, because you're right. Last summer, a controlled burn did get out of control, and we burned more land than we were authorized. It did not go off that land, but it is something that we are working to address right now. There is money in the budget that we were able to combine the prior year BRAC round closure budgets with the 2005 closure budget. So as we sell off land from the 2005 BRAC rounds, it goes into that environmental restoration budget and help funds environmental restoration for all BRAC lands. So we are able to have an increased funding stream to address the issues as you mentioned.
Well, I want to get into that too, but I'll maybe even wait for another round on that. I want to just finish off a couple of things. One is the Camp Roberts, which you visited here. I understand that Camp Roberts, which is run by the California National Guard, the MILCON distribution to the states has a distribution to the Army National Guard. And the question is, does the National Guard reserve training bases, which are ideal places for the Army components to train, which you are doing at Camp Roberts? We were talking about that before the hearing. And the incredible facilities that often the active duty military uses. What I'm concerned about is how the Army and the National Guard, how the Army distributes the money for the MILCON funds to the states.
When we look at our overall budget, we distribute the MILCON budget by a ratioing of the amount of infrastructure the services have. So if you look at the plant replacement value for the active Army, that's about 70% of the total inventory of infrastructure. The National Guard is about 20%, and the Army Reserve is about 7%.
I'm sure when you visited Camp Roberts, and I thank you for doing that, you saw that long bridge, the high water bridge, which is falling apart and can't be used at all. It's a tank trail connecting with Fort Hunter Leggett. But the problem is that it's the only way, the only road that you get to the emergency services. So if with that bridge out, you have to drive over an hour for in emergency situations to bring people to where they can get the care at Camp Roberts. And the bridge, as I understand it, was the TAG's #1 priority for MILCOM in the last 2 years. However, no monies have been funded to help restore that bridge. So how much weight does the state's top priority get in the criteria for MILCON funding?
The National Guard looks at the priorities from all of the states and puts them together. And earlier I explained that we prioritize on the base of fixing the most urgent needs. And sometimes a state's #1 priority may not be #1 for the entire National Guard.
Well, when is the high water bridge at Camp Roberts going to be in a fit-up?
I'm going to have to take a look at that and get back to you, sir.
Okay. I'll tell you, I have to say, one, because the other questions are going to be for the other witnesses, but I just want to say that I think I'm very critical of this process and slowness and awkwardness and UXO cleanup, but I think you're doing a stellar job in conservation. And I think, I'm very proud that Fort Hunter Liggett was selected in 2011 as the pilot site for Net Zero Energy Initiative. And since then, 2 megawatts of solar arrays have been constructed, and a 3rd megawatt is under design. This is really clever. What they did is they've been parking all their tanks and trucks in the direct sunlight, and the heat just does deterioration. What they did is build carports, and on top of those carports is nothing but solar array. I mean, it's huge, and they're able to generate enough electricity to sustain the whole base. And I don't know if these guys were pulling my leg, but they say these solar plates are so sensitive you can generate electrons with a full moon. It might be possible. Anyway,
Just not that much, but you can generate some.
so I want to praise you, and I'd love to have you, Mr. Chairman, you come out and see these places. Maybe we get a Codell. It's hard to visit Monterey County and all those beautiful places in California, but maybe we can do it. I like to brag about this net zero initiative.
If there's any part of the country it'd be worth seeing, it's your district. You got one of those beautiful parts of the United States, that coastline out there, Sam.
Well, come on out.
I'm not much of a traveler, but we do need to get out there.
We got a lot of rocks out. We got some rocks out there.
It's also the anniversary of D-Day, so
Oh, yeah.
we need to be thinking about that
Okay.
as a committee. I'm going to turn over a new leaf this year. I really appreciate y'all's patience. Again, I'm going to try to give everybody time to answer questions, so I appreciate your indulgence. I'm going to turn to Mr. Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to each of you, thanks for being here. And first, let me just say, we all on this panel have the greatest respect for what you're trying to do with limited resources and difficult challenges. But you also hear maybe questions or concerns in a bipartisan fashion on this panel, which I think is healthy. And I appreciate your transparency in trying to answer the questions. I just have a couple of questions. The first one to Mr. Conger relating to what Secretary Hagel said a few days ago, I guess a few weeks ago, and you'll recall, and I have the quote here, that as it relates to BRAC, he made the comment, if Congress continues to block these requests, even as they slash the overall budget, we will consider every tool at our disposal to reduce infrastructure. So was he suggesting that he would move forward without Congress's approval?
Well, a couple of points. One, he used the word consider. So the question is, do you look at all your options if we don't get a BRAC? And I think the answer is yes. He has, there exist authorities to close and realign bases that don't involve BRAC. And whether he considers those options, I think he made it clear, and I'm not going to say anything different than the Secretary said in that context. Did he say that we were going to go ahead and take actions if Congress didn't pass a BRAC? No, he said that they were going to be considered.
Which would mean that he is suggesting that he might consider moving forward without the approval of Congress or this panel here.
Well, those authorities came from Congress in the first place. And in all honesty, there's very little that can happen in the Department without the approval of Congress. Congress appropriates, as you well know, any money that we have to do anything. So it's a question of the authorities that Congress gives to act, and the specific actions are all going to have to come through here eventually.
And I assume it's safe to say each of you would prefer Congress directing the path forward as opposed to the Department going around Congress? Or is
Well,
there
first
something
of all, nobody's pretending that anybody's going to go around Congress, okay? But the question is the path forward that Congress authorizes. The second thing is that BRAC is clearly the preferred way to close and realign bases. It is more analytical, it is more transparent, it is more objective. It affords benefits to communities when properties are disposed of. If there was, say, a section of a base that was declared excess today, and that happens time to time, that simply gets sold without consultation with the local community. Under BRAC, when a base closes, the community gets to decide what happens to the base. And that means they can direct it towards economic job-generating activities. There are a lot of advantages to local communities from BRAC vis-a-vis other disposal mechanisms.
Right. So as we look forward, and I respect the suggestions that y'all are making, and you've made it clear, each of you, all four of you have said that you support and encourage BRAC moving forward. If for whatever reason this panel and the House of Representatives and the Senate does not agree with you, I would suggest and that the Secretary be very careful in considering going around Congress, because I don't think that's the healthiest process moving forward. To just another question to each of you, if you have maybe a number in mind. Each of you have spoken about efficiency as being the next BRAC. Is there an efficiency goal? Because I don't know that I heard that. Maybe you said it and I missed it, but is there like a number, like so many percent?
So the figure that Mr. Hale used when he was testifying with Secretary Hagel last week, I think, was that we have a projection based on a 5% reduction in plant replacement value, which is a fairly modest number, that based on previous BRAC rounds, that there would be approximately $6 billion worth of costs over the period of the BRAC, and approximately, when it's all complete, $2 billion annual return. There would be savings during the, if you take an action at the beginning of any BRAC round, the savings begin to accrue. And so during the period of BRAC, the estimate is that the cost would be a wash. So you would be saving roughly the same amount that you would be spending over the course of the 6 years, and then you'd get approximately $2 billion a year recurring thereafter, if you assume that 5%, modest 5%.
And that's in total, all the way across the department. Okay. And then I guess my last question. For each of you, if you could think through this, and maybe not through the lens of your position, but through the lens of caring and loving your country, as one who has families and such. When you really think about where we are as a nation, I mean, we all know we have enemies. We have those around the world that do not like us and want to destroy us. And a lot of children all across our country that go to bed every night and they sleep well, knowing that we're safe and we're secure. And I hear the conversation that we've had today, and I guess the question for me to each of you is, when you think about where we are as a nation, and when you think about the assets we have, the property, the equipment, personnel and such, do we have too much or too little in defending our nation and looking ahead in the future?
Well, let me answer that question broadly. You're talking to the installations folks. And so it's other officials within the department.
I'm just asking your personal opinion, not through Milcon itself, but just when you look at the concerns across the globe.
Absolutely. I think that it's important though, for us to, as witnesses for the department, keep that in mind. So as the installation folks, can we say that we have too much infrastructure? Yes, and moreover, what's really important about this is that the resources that are going to extra infrastructure that you don't need could be going to warfighters that do need the money. The training reductions that have occurred over the last couple of years and the shortfalls that they've encountered and the readiness shortfalls are critical, and far more critical than funding excess infrastructure.
Sure. Thank you. Yes.
On behalf of the Army, one of the challenges we have is reduced funding from Congress. And we simply do not have the money to operate buildings that are empty. And when we mothball them and when we shut off utilities, the building degrades. Then it becomes of no use to the Army. It becomes of no use to the private sector. So that's a lost opportunity for the private sector, where it could be put to productive use by taxpayers. It is no longer of value to anyone. So BRAC is an advantage in that it puts a base in productive use in the community versus having it sit idle and empty. The challenge is we still need to maintain it. We still need to operate it. And under the other authorities Mr. Conger referred to, we cannot reduce our manning without notification to Congress. So you can't reduce your manpower, and you can't reduce your square footage, and you can't reduce your boundaries. So we're sort of tied up in knots, because for the Army, 50% of our budget's manpower. And we are reducing that as the budget's gone down. But it takes a while to get those savings because we have a responsibility to try and ensure that the soldiers who leave the Army and their families are taken care of and have jobs. So as the budget goes down for manning, what's left is looking at your training, your modernization, and your facilities. And each one of those budgets are taking deep cuts to try and preserve as much of the force as we have.
I understand. But if there weren't these cuts, would you suggest that we need more in defense-related items? And that was my general question is, do you feel that we're spending too much overall or too little? And are we well equipped to defend this great nation into the 21st century from the enemies around the globe? That's the general question.
Well, I would like to echo the Secretary of Defense's comments that for the Army, taking cuts below 490 is of concern, and it is a risk.
Thank you. Thank you.
We need more ships. One of the ways of getting those ships is to allocate budget dollars to them. I'm an old Cold Warrior. I'll go back to 1991 when we had the first round of BRAC. We've had 5 since then. In the Department of the Navy, we have closed 186 installations or functions. 52 of them were major. If we had not been able to do that over the course of the ensuing 23 years in those 5 rounds of BRAC, our budget would be absolutely broken. I don't know how many ships we wouldn't have out there today. So do we need more dollars to do the things that Katherine just outlined? Yes. We always need to make that balance between the readiness of today and the capabilities of tomorrow or future readiness. And we need to pay for manpower. We need to pay for platforms. So, yes, my answer would be we could. But one of the ways, given a budget cap and the imperative to address budget challenges as a nation, we need to make sure that every dollar that goes for defense goes to where it's going to do us the most national security good. And keeping unused infrastructure, as painful as that process can be, is not the best use of those taxpayer dollars.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Ms. Ferguson.
Just in short, as the Air Force built the budget, we had to make some very difficult choices. And I think you see that reflected in our budget. We reduced force structure. We reduced A-10s, U-2s. We took significant risk in military construction installation support. I think it was the right risk as we go forward, but it's given where we are in the budgetary climate right now.
Thank you. Thank you to each of you. Yes.
Sir, could I have one follow-up?
Yes.
It's also the case, and I think this is more to your point, that the administration sent over a $26 billion additional fund for the Defense Department that was above the budget caps that included a variety of additional requirements, unfunded requirements, the Secretary referred to them as, which includes $2.9 billion worth of MILCON and $4.2 billion worth of facility sustainment, restoration, and modernization. That's $7 billion of facility money that was identified and sent over as additional needs beyond the budget.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you to each of you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. I'll be sure everybody gets time to ask questions. I'm, as you've noticed, not real strict with the 5-minute rule, but I do want to make sure everybody knows that we got votes between 3:30 and 4. So if I could turn to my good friend from Philadelphia, who I enjoy so much working with on the Commerce, Justice, and Science Subcommittee on so many good causes, my friend from Philadelphia, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask briefly then about installations and infrastructure around caring for injured soldiers. And so I'm particularly interested in traumatic brain injury and so on. So we have a lot of all-in costs when we have boots on the ground, say, for instance, in Afghanistan, in terms of being able to evacuate and treat soldiers quickly. Can anyone talk about whether or not in the sequester or in any of these other rollbacks, any of this support services is going to be affected in terms of hospitals and in-theater help for soldiers who are injured?
In the Army, we are working to protect health care and those kind of services to our soldiers as much as possible. So that's why we are taking cuts in military construction. We are taking cuts in sustaining our facilities. We're taking cuts in modernization, but taking care of our soldiers is a priority.
Anyone else want to comment?
Navy and Marine Corps, same story. That is job one, to take care of those warriors, especially those who have suffered the injuries of war and their families. So our investment in the hospitals over the past years in particular, we just opened a brand new hospital at Camp Pendleton out in California for the Marine Corps. There's been we have a world-class facility right here in Bethesda. So
What about in Germany? Are we going to build a new hospital, or what are we doing?
Sure. Yes, we're going to build a new hospital. I was just out at the site a couple weeks ago, and there are often environmental problems with cutting down trees in Germany. It's very, very difficult.
This is the biggest challenge we have there, is the tree issue, and we have to, it has to be navigated.
I can tell you, eyes on target, the trees have been cleared. It is an impressive sight to see this forest and this big empty clearing in the middle of the forest, that the German government has executed that.
So can you talk to me, you were just there can you give the committee some insight about the ensuing timeline then?
The specific timeline, I know that it's an incremental
Well, at least
project.
generally, give us a general picture of it.
Yeah, I mean, in general, the project is proceeding. There have been several increments funded already. There's another large increment that we're requesting this year. If I can give you more details.
Okay, well, let me just for 1 second, and I'll leave at this, Chairman. I'm very interested in the construction and architectural focus on the operating rooms relative to brain surgery, and whether or not we are going to be at the edge, at the very cutting edge of making sure that as the hospital is constructed, that we're taking into account where the primary focus of injuries now, in large measure, happen to be.
In fairness, sir, I'm not a brain surgeon, so I'm not going to be in a position to provide that amount of detail right here at the desk. But we'll get that for you for the record and let you know what the capabilities of the new hospital.
Well, thank you. And if you would get it to the chairman, he's in charge, and he'll make sure that those of us who are further down the totem pole is shared with. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very, very much. And I would, when the VA comes talk to us, we need to be sure that's a part of the discussion, is the work the VA is doing to make sure that they're treating these young men and women with these traumatic.
Mr. Chairman, as you know, in the first instance, when the soldier is harmed, they are in the DOD system, and then they're treated, and then they're turned over to VA at some point after discharge. So we got to make sure that the front-end system provides the very best care.
Remarkable things being done, for example, the VA in Houston, working in conjunction with Baylor and University of Texas in this area. That's why I bring it up.
That's why I'm going to work with you. We're going to do even more remarkable things.
Thank you very much. And at this point, let me recognize.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. This is for Secretary Hammack and Secretary Ferguson. You know, when you visit an active military installation, you very quickly become aware, and as you've mentioned, about equipment upgrades, as you've already talked about infrastructure. For example, Maxwell Air Force Base has the second oldest control tower in the Air Force. And at Fort Rucker, the helicopter overwater survival training facility host is completely outdated and falling apart. And as a member of Congress, and I've expressed this to you, I've become more and more frustrated with my inability to help resolve these issues. I know installations all over the country have needs like this, has already been voiced by all of my colleagues here today. So I'm interested to hear you talk about how you prioritize. I know you've talked about readiness, and if you need to expand on that, that's fine. But how does one get on the list, so to speak, and how is final priority determined? I shared with you a conversation that I had out at Maxwell when I'm up in this tower, that by the way, it is so old, Mr. Chairman, that the escape route, if there's a fire, consists of a cable that runs to the roof of the building next to it. You have to get in a net-like contraption and slide down the cable to get out. So I'm explaining to Colonel Edwards at Maxwell, you know, you now have to lobby to the Pentagon to get this
dealt with because of rules that we have here in Congress. I just want to know how you guys are going about prioritizing these really serious infrastructure needs, and if you two will comment on that based on the Army and the Air Force, that'd be great.
The way we prioritize it does come up through the command, so they have to talk with their command first. Their command then prioritizes, and then it comes to the Pentagon. And our focus right now with reduced budgets is a focus on failing. So a facility might be adequate. They'd like to do more there, and they think they should do more, but it is adequate to achieve the level of training they need, but it's not failing. So therefore, it would not have as high a priority as a facility that's termite-ridden, that we're concerned about the structure, that one corner of the building's up on jacks, and it desperately needs to be replaced because that's considered failing. So that's what our focus is on.
If I may, in support of what Ms. Roby's asking, and also Sam was asking about a bridge, it seems to me human safety and health ought to be a top priority. If they can't even get out of the building, they have to ride down a rope in the event of a fire, and they can't get to an emergency hospital room in Sam's district, but for an hour drive because of a broken bridge, that ought to be top of the list, it seems to me, isn't it? And if not,
If
why
it
not?
is failing, or if it's life, health, and safety, then yes, it goes to the top of the list.
She ought to be at the top of the list.
I'll let the Air Force.
I can answer the air traffic control. I can't answer the bridge question now. What I'd like to offer is if we could come over and talk to you and walk through how the Air Force goes through and prioritizes, but very similar to how the Army does it. The requirements come up from the base to the major command, and we do look at life safety health as part of the equation. But if you go back and you look at our FY15 budget request, we have no current mission MILCON projects in there. Basically, with our funding level and our support to our combatant commanders requirements are taking up over, and they should, taking up over 50% of our MILCON budget for this cycle. Another third of the budget is towards supporting new mission bed downs such as the KC-46 and F-35. And so there's no money really left over for any of the current missions. So what we're doing is we're using our O&M money to keep those facilities going and keep them operating. And I've been out to Maxwell recently. They do have a lot of new facilities there and have had quite a bit over the last few years, but that we were not able to get to that when we still had current mission.
When I just use this as an example for, Air Force-wide and Army-wide, these are specific to my district, but I know I'm not alone in these concerns about how are we making these decisions based on, what the mission is at that particular installation, but the mission overall. And so those are my concerns. I appreciate it.
And I'd like to offer to you or
I will
any of
take
the
you up
other
on that,
MLA, any of your MLAs, we can get a group over and walk through our whole process.
We will take you up on that. Thank you. Also, in light of the limited budgets, is the Air Force considering moving the National Guard and/or reserve units onto active installations to share facilities or services, and especially those that already are adjacent to or nearby installations?
We don't have a current ongoing initiative to look across the Air National Guard to look to move them onto the active duty installations. We look at them predominantly during a mission change to see if it would make sense to operate out of an active duty location, look at the business case analysis for that. So we do it on a case-by-case basis.
To Secretary Hammack, we've already talked about the request for the 2017 BRAC, and I recognize that there is a need for all of the services to tighten belts, and that there will be an excess of infrastructure with the drawdown. But as you indicated, the Army was conducting this facility capacity analysis. Can you elaborate for all of us on your preliminary results with regard to the utilization and excess infrastructure in the Army, and especially in light of the restructuring plan, and how the excess infrastructure impacts both readiness and modernization? This is something that I know you've put a lot of emphasis on.
Absolutely. And when we're able to consolidate, this wasn't just a look at active Army, but also at Guard and Reserve. And Guard and Reserve are doing a very active study to look at consolidation at the request of Congress. I think Phase 3 of the report is due in December of this year, and identifying places that they could consolidate into. Many of those are into active Army bases. One of the projects that the National Guard put forward is consolidating, I can't remember, I think it was like 13 individual buildings into one building at half the square footage. But in 13 individual buildings, there were corners and places that weren't productive. So each of them has their own set of restrooms, each of them has their own set of kitchenettes, yet when you merge it together in one building, you merge some of those central core facilities together, you get a better square foot utilization. So it actually saves them money, reduces their square footage, reduces their operating costs, and improves their operations. So those are the kinds of efficiencies that we're really looking at. So when we look at excess capacity, we say that each soldier needs X amount of square footage for sleeping quarters, X amount of square footage for administration, X amount of square footage for the various tasks that they do. So this was a macro capacity analysis looking at our real property inventory, looking at the size of our force and the roles of our force, and then looking at the requirements based. And when we put it all together, that's where we identified on a macro basis the 18% excess capacity. With authorization for another round of BRAC, one of the first steps is a capacity analysis that looks at each individual installation, just like we're doing in Europe, and identifies exactly where that square footage is, what kind of spaces it is, and what could consolidate into it. Where are those viable facilities so we can make the best use of the infrastructure we have? That's what we need in a 2017 BRAC.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have a couple more questions, but I can save them, and I know there's others that need to ask questions, so thank you.
Votes are going to happen in about 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Hammack, I want to thank you for taking time to visit Mississippi and the Corps of Engineers Research and Development Center there. It's not in my district, but it is an important part of our state. And I know that you realize, or you wouldn't have gone there, the important work they do in terms of supporting our nation's civil works water resource infrastructure, and also the work they do in support of national security, supporting Army installations. And so, while I'm pleased that these labs have the support in the minor MILCOM process, I know there's times they take a back seat to other national priorities in the major MILCOM programming and budget process over the years. It just seems to me if we're going to ask them to do a job, and we recognize that the job they're doing is vital for both our civil works and our national security, we've got to make sure that they have the resources that are necessary, including infrastructure, to accomplish that job. So I just want to ask you to make sure you cooperate with Ms. Shue and her staff when you develop future MILCOM budget requests so that the needs of this and other labs are not ignored. Let me just get you to respond to that briefly.
Absolutely, and it is something that we're looking at, our industrial base and our labs, to ensure that they are appropriately funded. The challenges are, and especially the challenge in our fiscal year 15 budget, it is so low and the cuts are so deep, it is challenging us just to support the force that we have. So we are unable to fund some of the science and technology labs the way we would like to.
Thank you. And Secretary Conger, you talked about reducing our footprint in Europe, and I don't think we've really talked about the impact of the situation in the Ukraine and Crimea, and where we're going to be left if we do reduce our footprint, and what impact the Ukraine and Russia will have on that.
Sure. It's important to recognize that the study that we're doing is not about reducing the amount of people we have over there, or even the force structure, the number of planes or ships or whatever. What we are looking at is, given the force structure that we have today, what is the most efficient laydown of infrastructure. And we have to take into account surge capacity there too, and under various operational plans, how much additional capability would you need if you have to stress the system. And that has been supplied by European Command, and we've incorporated that into our analysis. So we have that flex. Given all of those requirements, do we still have extra space? And the answer is yes. And so the question is one of how do you fit it in, how do you fit that force structure and that surge capacity into the smallest and most efficient footprint? And there will be some efficiencies to be gained, but it shouldn't affect our ability to respond to any crisis.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Donnelly. And Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the last year, I was looking at one of our key pieces of military infrastructure with a 4-star general. And as we were speaking to some of the troops, we stopped, and there was a young airman, a young woman who was an airman. Do we say airwoman? Airman, yeah. And the general stopped and looked at her and asked her, "Where are you from?" Now, she's probably 19, and this is a 4-star general, congressman next to her, a little bit of an intimidating, out-of-the-blue set of circumstances, and so she hesitates and softly says, "Do you mean where I was born or where I live now?" And he said, "Yeah, where are you from? Where were you born?" And she very quietly and softly said, "Russia." And the general looked at me and said, "I can almost guarantee that the Russian generals reviewing his troops never hear that anyone was born in the United States there." And he went on to ask her, "Why did you join the Air Force?" She said, "Well, this country took me in when I was in need, and I wanted to give something back." Now, I was in conversation with someone from a foreign country, a developing country recently, who pointed out to me that we forget how strong we are. Now, we are here talking about difficult budgetary times and how we're going to have to think creatively, and sometimes when things are under tension, you get rid of that which was old and no longer necessary and prioritize that which is needed based upon emerging trends and the constraints that we have. So budgets, as tough as they are, can be times in which it forces us all to think creatively and how to restructure things. But I do feel your pain, and it is painful for us as well. But thank you for your professionalism in trying to get through this in a responsible manner. I do want to ask for an update from you on the progress of the Strategic Command new building, which is in my district. It's my understanding Strategic Command accepts the President's budget level. I can assure you that the dirt movers were there digging that hole even deeper this winter, that has progressed well. Can you give me any further insights on how the budgetary process is unfolding, any impacts on the new building?
In our FY15 budget request, we have requested $180 million to fund the last phase, the last increment, of the U.S. STRATCOM facility. 15% of the facility is complete right now. We awarded that project in September of 2012, and it's on track to complete the facility construction in 2016, and then there'll be a period of time for about 2 years where all the comm and all the other equipment will go in, but right now it's still on track. We've got a senior executive steering group that reviews it very closely and consistently, and they were just out there 2 weeks ago, so we're very comfortable with where we are and,
Good.
And what worked.
I hadn't heard anything otherwise, so that's just good confirmation, and I appreciate that. Let me bring up a few points that have already been covered, and we may be able to unpack them further. In any BRAC round, is there an associated economic redevelopment plan that goes along with that works in conjunction with local communities? It was mentioned, I believe, by you, Secretary Hammack, that these are given to the local community, but I assume the Federal Government plays some sort of transitional role in helping figure out the best and highest possible next use.
What we do is we coordinate with a local reuse authority that is usually stood up by the state and the community there. So the local reuse authority weighs in heavily as a type of reuse that they would like to see, and they work to market the facility as we work to transfer the property.
As a suggestion in terms of marketing the concept of a BRAC, I think, and interweaving this type of commentary with the suggestion that we're going to have to reduce excess capacity and close things is a good first presentation to particularly to many communities out there, that this is not going to leave you high and dry. I mean, obviously, it will cause a change, which may be difficult in some circumstances, but I would suggest that be an advertised component of the way in which we talk about this.
Absolutely, and there's a group called the Association of Defense Communities, which we met with this year, and we had those kind of direct conversations and discussions, and we meet with many communities. Right now, there's 3 or 4 communities that come in a week to the Pentagon that we meet with, and we talk about how we can increase the reuse, what kind of work we can do together to ensure it's of benefit to the community.
This is helpful to know. All of you have clearly wanted to emphasize your desire for a new BRAC round in your commentary, but I think that this is helpful to know that you're already doing this, but I think splashing that high on the wall would be a good idea.
Thank you.
The other question that I had, I think Congresswoman Roby mentioned it, combining Guard and Reserve components. Now, once upon a time, we invented our current military, and you're living with legacy systems, legacy structures that maybe made optimal sense in a previous time. The discussion about, a high-level discussion about the appropriateness of not only combining infrastructure, but the concept, the very concept of Guard and Reserve components into one. Where is that? Is this the front end of that kind of discussion in terms of building realignment?
There are synergies. There's synergies in training, but when we talk about facilities, we look at synergies in the facility itself. In the last round of BRAC, there was a lot of consolidation in joint use readiness facilities. One I visited in Oregon, they pulled in Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, 2 Guard units, and a Reserve unit all into the same building. And part of the people use the building on the weekends, part use during the week.
Can I interject something? This seems to be happening on an ad hoc basis, though. Based upon something that you said just a few moments ago, rather than a coordinated initiative from the top down to continue to look at options in this. We've got the same thing. We've got a Joint Force headquarters in Lincoln, Nebraska, where you've got Guard, State Patrol, and Emergency Management personnel all housed. Works wonderfully. But I think, again, as we move forward, looking at smart ways to not only combine facility use, but rethinking overlapping missions. What we don't want to do, and this is a bit of an editorial comment, a little perhaps beyond your purview, is lose the vast depth of knowledge and experience gained, particularly by our Guard, in this last 10 years of difficult warfighting. If we go back to just regular status, we're going to lose, and it will be all the harder if we have an incident where we've got to pull back into some crises and we lose the continuity of that experience and expertise. That doesn't make much sense. So as we look at, you use the word synergies, options that are out there, and I know your primary concern is the effective use of infrastructure, but it is a related question about, again, forced realignment and forced structure to meet modern warfighting needs.
One of the challenges we're facing with the budget, as I said, our manpower is almost a fixed budget, and that's 50%. You have training, modernization, and facilities. In order to ensure that our Guard and Reserve are well trained, we need to be able to fund training so that they can get the number of hours in that they need. And that has had to take a cut, as has modernization and facilities, in order to meet the budget requirements, because it's difficult to take down your manpower at a rapid pace and ensure that they're cared for.
Is there talk about combining the Guard and Reserve?
Sir, I think that's for another group.
All right, we'll save that for another day. One quick other question. Is Okinawa going to be completely closed?
No, sir, it will not. There'll be continued presence in Okinawa, but it'll be less than it is today.
So what % reduction?
I'll take that for the record if you will allow me, and I'll give you precise numbers about our
You're
rebalance.
talking about the troop reduction. I was just trying to get a sense of what the longer-term projection is here. It's not necessary that you go back and do a huge amount of research.
It's not greater than 50%.
Okay, all right.
And the Air Force presence remains there.
Thank you.
I'm going to pass myself, and any other questions I'll submit for the record so my colleagues will have a chance to ask questions. I know Mr. Bishop had a statement, then I'm going to go to you.
Yeah, I don't have any further questions. I just want to just make the comment that I can fully appreciate the difficult position that you find yourselves in. I know that you have a responsibility to do what you do in the best way and the most efficient way that you can, and of course, we too have a responsibility to try to balance the overall strategic defense interests for our country. And so I appreciate your forthrightness, and I look forward to having further conversations with you, and appreciate your willingness to talk about some of the nuances going forward. So thank you very much, and I yield to back my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bishop, and they'll probably call votes any minute here, and I'm going to yield to my good friend, Mr. Farr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ernberry, we have a Defense Community Caucus, bipartisan caucus. Invite you to join. We'll keep you informed on all those issues. And Ms. Hammack, I enjoyed that conversation you had with him about the training for the National Guard and Reserves, but you got to build the bridge so they can get to the training grounds. You said something in your testimony that intrigued me, and that was that you have unobligated balances in the BRAC account for cleanup, and that aren't reflected in this budget, which is you eviscerate the cleanup budget, but you have these, when you combine the two programs, you had unobligated funds, and source inside the Pentagon tells me that's about $900 million. Is that correct?
For all services, that is the combined account. I would say for the Army, we have committed but not yet obligated 3/4 of the Army's portion of that fund. We have, if you have a cleanup program that's a 20-year cleanup program, we have allocated funds each year for 20 years in order to clean up and complete that project. So as we map out these programs, the amount of time it takes to do some of this environmental restoration, it's not only money, but it's also time and technology.
Well, that's what I want to ask you. If we have an account for all Pentagon at $900 million that are unobligated, I need to commit one that'll stay obligated then for that purpose, for cleanup. And two, why hasn't it been obligated? I mean, I don't buy this fact that it's lack of technology. I've been here 20 years and doing cleanup, and the day I got elected, every special interest was out there with a technology, from satellite technology to flying a helicopter to doing everything possible if you just fund their program. And we've been doing the cleanup. The technology's evolved actually in the field, not somebody in a laboratory. And
some of the challenges, sir, is how that is reported. If it has not been committed on a contract and or spent, it goes into an account that's called unobligated.
I understand
even
that.
though we
The
have a
question is, how do we,
20-year
I mean, we have defense contractors out there, the cleanup contractors, that indicate that their capacity is what every year? $2 billion in capacity. So why haven't we been matching the needs with the resources?
Sir, I'd like to take that offline because we can show you how we have already committed the majority of those funds for cleanup, and so I'd like to be able to sit down with you and explain that.
Mr. Farr, could I amplify that too, holistically for the department? Two quick things. One, I'd like, when we talk about unobligated balances, I'd like to get you a coordinated answer with the Comptroller's office, just so we make sure that you have the right numbers, and we'll get you the...
I want to be sure, one, that all that money's there that you say that's there, because it ain't in your budget. And I want to make sure that it's obligated for the purposes for which it was always intended, and that you spend it.
Yes. So that's
And I concur in that,
absolutely.
Sam.
Let me give you just a couple quick statistics on BRAC cleanup.
I don't want statistics.
All right.
I don't want it. I just want to get this
You
done.
wanna make sure
And we
that
don't
you
have
get
enough
cleaned up.
time to do it. And I want to ask in the 2 seconds or so left, just let's get this done, all right? There's no more excuses. Mr. McGinn, in the Navy, I represent the Naval Postgraduate School, which has probably been BRAC'd more than any other. Every time they BRAC it, they come out there and say, wow, we can't close this place. It's just too keen. It's too full of incredible intellectual capacity. In your testimony, you indicated that the BRAC process has an analytical process. It's foolproof and essentially a really great, smart practice. Have you yet adapted in that process the ability to measure intellectual capacity?
I didn't say it was foolproof. I said it was analytical and data-driven, but certainly not foolproof. I have availed myself of the wonderful academic environment at Navy Postgraduate School for various executive-level courses, and I would describe it as a true national asset. It's a wonderful academic institution, not only for all of our armed services, but for many of our allied countries who
I totally agree. And then why anybody in the Department of the Navy thinks it ought to be BRAC is beyond my, and they always come up that nobody gave them any sort of measurement of what you point out, the intellectual capacity of this school. And I think that if all the services, if you're going to do this in your institutions of learning, I mean, this is unique. You cannot get that degree at MIT with the kind of, you can't get it because you couldn't enter MIT without a background in engineering, where you could be a music major or a religion major undergrad and get into the Naval Postgraduate School and get your graduates are just as good as the ones that come out of the civilian schools.
Sir,
I think the capacity is phenomenal there.
we're in total agreement, sir.
All right. Now, I also have heard that there's going to be, or you said in your testimony, that it wasn't your testimony, but Conger's, John Conger's testimony, that if Congress didn't authorize another BRAC round, you were going to just do it administratively under the authorities of Sections 2687 to significantly reduce the activities of various bases, in essence, a BRAC without a BRAC. If that happens, what are you going to downsize or close, and what would that look like?
So allow me to offer a clarification. I don't think my testimony quite said that, but I do think that the Secretary said, and I can quote him because I came prepared, that if Congress, mindful that Congress has not agreed to our BRAC request for the last 2 years, but if Congress continues to block these requests while reducing the overall budget, we will have to consider every tool at our disposal to reduce infrastructure. It was not quite so explicit as you made it. Considering every authority does not mean that you have a list in your pocket.
And if you don't have the authority under that to, if it's not done under BRAC, to dispose of the property, and that's the concern I have. You may get rid of it, download it, as somebody said in their testimony, but not the ability to transfer it under BRAC for all the purposes outlined in that category, nor clean it up. So is this what, I mean, is this a threat, or what are you telling the committee, that you have to have BRAC or you're going to do it your way?
So the budget pressures are pressing us to a point where we have to explore all the options to reduce those infrastructure carrying costs. As we look at all of those options, the preferred option for reducing infrastructure is BRAC. I think the Secretary said that very clearly. I think his spokesman said that very clearly, and I think the senior officials of the Department have said that very clearly. But budget pressures are budget pressures, and if there is not a BRAC round, then we'll be forced to, reduce spending some other way.
Are you going to come to this committee before you launch on that activity?
I think that right now the Secretary is talking about considering those options, and so I think that he would be the one that would have to decide what would happen next.
Well, I think the Chair and the rest of us would be very interested if you're going to proceed along those lines for all kinds of issues that will have to be answered there. Lastly, let's make a recommendation. Do you really emphasize environmental health and safety? And it's important you do that, and I appreciate that. But I'm just wondering, because in my district there's a company called the Pacific Scientific Energetic Materials Company that is a supplier of DOD's ordnances, electronics, laser, pyrotechnic, and vehicle resting components. And the system is used on and systems on many of the current and legacy systems. The facility recently was recognized within the Danaher Corporation for the most improved environmental health and safety program in America. It's a wonderful recognition. And I just wonder, do you use that in being able to require that your contractors or that supply your bases use these incentives for awarding contracts, and give them some, or what incentives you do use by DOD to work with defense industry bases to encourage supply and use of environmental friendly materials and substances to implement your best EHS practices?
Sir, that's an awfully specific question. I'd like to take that for the record so we give you a good answer.
Yeah, I like good answers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Farr. I want to make sure I recognize Ms. Roby for any additional questions she may have. Just a word of wisdom, quick. I don't think it's, if you really are, please don't think about doing a round of BRAC administratively. I think you really would be kicking a hornet's nest unnecessarily. So, Ms. Roby.
Thank you. I just have two more quick questions. Secretary Ferguson, do you see funding being made available to help communities with public-public and public-private partnerships, the P4 initiative, for things such as moving military and DOD civilians between facilities or consolidation efforts on an installation?
Okay, if I may, I also want to thank Congressman Farr and for the great work that the House Defense Communities Caucus has done in the enabling legislation, Section 331, that is allowing us to do so many of these public-public, public-private partnerships. And over the last year, we've been able to start 16 exercises, or 16 tabletop exercises across the United States. Are doing 30 more this year, and we've identified 400 initiatives so far. We've done all of this without any additional money, and so we don't have a pot of money to do that with, but as requirements come in, we're looking to put in the process to see what makes sense, and certainly if something saves a significant amount of money, we'll look to try to get the resources to execute it.
Great, thanks. And Secretary Hammack, during the quality of life hearing, the senior enlisted advisors of each service discussed the impact of the basic allowance for housing, how it had on the out-of-pocket expenses for service members. And do you have any concern about the viability of your agreements with RCI partners, given the President's FY15 budget proposal, which would reduce that?
Right now, we're working with our RCI partners to identify whether they could absorb a reduction in BA and how they could or would charge service members for any incremental rent costs. So we're evaluating that on a case-by-case basis with each project.
Okay, great. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Roby. I deeply appreciate your testimony today, your service to the country. I'll submit the remainder of our questions for the record because they're going to call a vote any minute on the House floor. Deeply, again, appreciate your presence today, your testimony, and your service, and our hearing is adjourned. Thank you.